Alright, so you just got your camera out and you're wondering what all these settings are. M means you're in manual mode. The fraction here is your shutter speed. I'm in 1/2000th of a second, and basically you want to reduce your shutter speed when you want the shutter to stay open longer to let in more light, and then close. Basically, so 1/2000th of a second is basically you hit the trigger, flips right away. Now if I reduce it down to like 1/4 of a second, you hit the trigger, it's like leaves it open for a little bit, so trigger, and then it kind of closes, and then you get more light to your sensor for that image. Now generally for high-speed situations, when you want to freeze the action, you want like 1/2000th of a second or 1/1500th of a second, somewhere in that ballpark, which means you're going to need high ISO or a large aperture or both, depending on the lighting situation. Which is next is your aperture. So my lens only goes down to an f4. The lower the number, the larger the aperture. The larger the number, the smaller the aperture. So in your lens, you have little blades that open and close that basically adjust the aperture. Next is your ISO. I have my ISO set to be this dial here. Basically, it scrolls up and down. And what that does is it basically increases and decreases the sensitivity of light sensitivity on your sensor. So basically, if you underexpose it, if it's too underexposed with the shutter speed and the aperture, you're going to end up with graininess when you add ISO because there's not enough light hitting your sensor. ISO isn't actually what causes noise, but makes it more, is what brings out the noise basically. What we have next, that's the color balance. Usually you're not going to touch that. This is your auto white balance. You can also adjust that to be a set white balance. Say if you have yellow lights in the stadium and you want everything to be white, you would basically cool it down a little bit, and then you get white lights on your images. But that only affects the JPEGs, it won't affect the RAWs. Here is like low FPS or whatever, auto low FPS. You're not going to have that. That's wireless connectivity. That's what my output is, which is RAW. This is my autofocus setting. I have it set for spot, and I have servo autofocus set. And this is going to be my metering mode and full frame autofocus tracking. And you can see my GPS is missing. I got all my Wi-Fi stuff down there. And this is how I would adjust my buttons, basically what the button settings do. So let's go here. So basically, let me look at the ground with this camera. Now, remember I turned up my ISO here. ISO is down here, probably 800. And when I half press my shutter button, that's going to give me exposure on the exposure meter. You see on the exposure meter down here, it's almost halfway. Now your camera may or may not have this setting, but when I hit the info button, I can get all my settings back up here. I can also get this histogram up here, which gives me the exposure for the entire scene and not just where my spot metering is set. So how would you increase or decrease the exposure of the scene? Basically opening up your aperture to increase exposure on the scene. Basically if it's too dark, open your aperture. If it's too bright, close your aperture. Now let me show you what opening and closing the aperture does. So I'm going to attempt to show you over here. So you're going to look in the middle here and look for blades that are opening and closing. See it open, see it close, open, closed, and that's your aperture in there. Now that's as wide as my aperture can go. And you can go smaller like that, or you go wide open. Usually I shoot almost always wide open apertures because usually I'm trying to get more exposure to my lens. I mean, you can see right now it's on the GoPro here, it's daylight out and I'm at 1/2000th of a second and you can't see anything until you increase the ISO to like 1000, and then you'll see here on the exposure meter it says it's properly exposed. But now keep in mind that I'm exposing for this little circle area in the middle here, and that's what it's exposing for on the light meter here. On the histogram shows me the light throughout the whole thing. So even though this will say, oh, proper exposure, you can see we have some spikes in the highlights over here, so we can a little bit underexpose there to try to bring the highlights down a little bit. But that's the basic settings of how this is going to work, and that's what your settings mean and what they do. I hope this helps you out. You didn't really provide any specifics on what lens you were using, but I would probably use like a larger aperture lens like this RF50 f1.8 if you can get close enough. This would be great for indoors or low light for high shutter speeds without getting all the graininess in your photo. But I hope this helps you out. Thanks for watching.